To understand the scream, you must first understand the silence that tried to suffocate it. Janis Joplin was not born into the neon swirl of the psychedelic 60s, she was forged in the thick, humid oppression of Port Arthur, Texas, in the conservative heart of the 1940s. It was a town that smelled of oil refineries and sulfur, a place where the American dream was strictly defined by white picket fences, church on Sundays, and absolute conformity. In this landscape of flat horizons and rigid expectations, Janis was a glitch in the system. She was loud, she was intellectually restless, and perhaps most unforgivable of all in a Texas oil town, she was different. Born in 1943, she started as a good girl, a church choir singer, a painter, a bright student who wanted to please her parents. But as puberty hit, nature played a cruel trick. She gained weight, her skin erupted in severe acne, and her features didn't align with the porcelain doll standard of Southern beauty. In the brutal social hierarchy of Thomas Jefferson High School, she wasn't just ignored, she was targeted. The bullying she endured was not merely teasing, it was a systematic dismantling of her self-worth. They called her pig, freak, and nigger lover because of her fascination with black culture and blues music. This trauma didn't just hurt her feelings, it carved a hole in her soul that no amount of future applause, heroin, or Southern comfort could ever fill. She learned early on that to be Janis was to be wrong. While her peers were listening to polished pop music and preparing for lives as obedient housewives, Janis was discovering a secret world that would save her life. In the dusty grooves of Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and Odetta records, she found a kinship. These were women who didn't sing about being pretty, they sang about pain, about betrayal, about the raw, bloody business of being alive. Listening to Bessie Smith, Janis realized that her own pain had a texture, a sound. She began to mimic these voices, not realizing that she possessed an instrument of terrifying power. The revelation came at a party. Janis, the outcast beatnik who hung around with the boys reading Jack Kerouac, opened her mouth to sing Odetta's "What a Month Was Jesus Born In." The room stopped. The voice that came out of this small, insecure teenage girl was not human, it was a force of nature. It was gravel and honey, a sound that seemed to scrape against the bottom of her lungs. For the first time, the boys didn't look at her with mockery, they looked at her with awe. It was a drug more potent than any chemical, acceptance. She realized that when she sang, she wasn't the ugly girl from Port Arthur anymore, she was a conduit for something ancient and powerful. But even then, the duality was established, Janis the blues mama, who could level a room, and Janis the little girl blue, who just wanted to be told she was pretty. Desperate to escape the suffocation of her hometown, she fled to the University of Texas at Austin in 1962. She hoped that a university, a place of higher learning, would be different. She was wrong. The cruelty of the world followed her. In a devastating incident that would haunt her until her death, a fraternity nominated her for the title of ugliest man on campus. And she won. The humiliation was total. Her picture was plastered around the campus, a punchline for the cruelty of privileged boys. This event was the final severance from normal society. It broke something inside her, but it also lit a fuse. She realized she could never win their game, so she decided to create her own. She stopped trying to fit in. She embraced the beatnik persona fully, wearing men's shirts, going barefoot, carrying an autoharp, and drinking like a sailor. If they were going to call her a freak, she would be the greatest, loudest, most undeniable freak they had ever seen. She dropped out of college, packed her bags, and stuck out her thumb on the highway. The destination was a mythical city on the coast, a place where the misfits were building a new Jerusalem, San Francisco. Her first attempt to conquer San Francisco in 1963 was a disaster. She fell in with the folk scene, but she also fell into the dark embrace of speed and methamphetamine. The city by the bay was not yet the colorful hippie haven it would become, it was gritty, and Janis, with her addictive personality, spiraled quickly. She withered away to 88 pounds, a skeletal ghost of herself, vibrating with nervous energy and chemical exhaustion. Her friends, fearing she would die, pooled their money to buy her a bus ticket back to Texas. The return to Port Arthur in 1965 was a walk of shame. She came back defeated, wearing a bun, dressing conservatively, trying once again to be the good daughter. She engaged to a man who wore suits, she swore off drugs, and she tried to bury the voice. For a year, she lived a lie, trying to suppress the volcano inside her. But destiny has a way of finding you, even in the suburbs of Texas. A friend from San Francisco, Chet Helms, tracked her down. He told her about a new band that needed a singer, a loud, chaotic psychedelic rock group called Big Brother and the Holding Company. He told her that something was happening in San Francisco, something big, and they needed her fire. Janis looked at her life, the safety, the boredom, the slow death of conformity, and she looked at the bus ticket. She knew that going back might kill her, but staying would definitely kill her soul. She chose the fire. When Janis arrived back in San Francisco in June 1966, the city was undergoing a metamorphosis. The Haight-Ashbury district was no longer just a neighborhood, it was the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. The Victorian houses were painted in psychedelic colors, the air smelled of patchouli and pot, and the streets were teeming with flower children seeking a new way to live. Into this technicolor carnival stepped Janis, shedding her Texas skin for the last time. She hooked up with Big Brother and the Holding Company, a band that was less a musical group and more a chaotic family of noise. They weren't technically proficient, their guitars went out of tune, their timing was loose, but they had a raw, primal energy that matched Janis's fury perfectly. They were the thunder, and she was the lightning. The chemistry was instantaneous and volatile. Janis didn't just sing with the band, she fought with them on stage. She would stomp her feet, shake her hair like a lioness, and scream until the veins in her neck bulged. It was anti-pop. It was ugly, sweaty, and utterly mesmerizing. For the first time in her life, Janis wasn't the outcast, she was the matriarch. She draped herself in feather boas, piled on cheap costume jewelry, and drank Southern Comfort straight from the bottle. She was constructing Pearl, the tough, loud, sexually aggressive persona that would shield the fragile girl inside. But the armor was heavy, and wearing it 24 hours a day began to take a toll. The moment the world tilted on its axis was June 17, 1967. The Monterey International Pop Festival. This was the debutante ball for the counterculture, featuring The Who, Hendrix, and Otis Redding. Big Brother was slotted for a Saturday afternoon set. Most of the LA music executives and press had never heard of them. Janis walked onto the stage looking like a thrift store explosion, grabbed the microphone stand as if she were trying to strangle it, and unleashed ball and chain. It wasn't a performance, it was an emotional massacre. She wailed, she pleaded, she stomped the stage with a ferocity that scared the people in the front row. The camera famously cut to Mama Cass of the Mamas and the Papas in the audience, her mouth agape in pure shock, mouthing the word wow. Janis had tapped into a collective vein of pain that the summer of love tried to ignore. She wasn't singing about peace and flowers, she was singing about the agony of wanting someone who doesn't want you back. By the time the song ended, the audience was silent for a heartbeat, and then they erupted. In that 30-minute set, Janis Joplin went from a local curiosity to the first female superstar of rock. She had finally won. Or so she thought. Fame hit Janis like a tsunami. Suddenly, the girl who had been voted ugliest man on campus was being photographed by Vogue. Men who wouldn't have looked at her twice in Texas were now lining up to light her cigarette. But this validation was a double-edged sword. The press focused intensely on her, often sidelining the band. They called Big Brother Janis Joplin's backup band, creating deep resentment among the musicians who had been her family. Albert Grossman, the ruthless manager who also handled Bob Dylan, saw the dollar signs. He whispered in Janis's ear that she was too good for them, that they were holding her back, that she needed to be a solo star. Janis was torn. She loved the guys in Big Brother, they were her brothers in arms, but she also knew they were musically limited. She wanted to sing soul, R&B, jazz, she wanted to expand. The pressure to leave was immense. At the same time, her drug use was shifting from recreational to survival. The alcohol was a constant companion, but now, darker substances were creeping in. Heroin, the velvet blanket, offered a way to numb the crushing anxiety that hit her the moment she walked off stage. The adrenaline crash after a show was so severe that she described it as making love to 25,000 people and then going home alone. By the end of 1968, the center could not hold. After the massive success of the album Cheap Thrills, with its iconic crumb cover and the raw power of Piece of My Heart, Janis made the heartbreaking decision to leave Big Brother. It was a messy, painful divorce. She formed a new band, the Cosmic Blues Band, complete with a horn section and a more polished, Stax-influenced sound. The critics were divided. Some missed the raw psychedelic chaos of Big Brother, others praised her vocal evolution. But for Janis, the transition was terrifying. She was now the sole focal point. If the show failed, it was her fault. To cope with the pressure, the mask of Pearl became permanent. She felt she had to be on all the time, the loud, cursing, drinking, tough mama. She bought a Porsche, painted it with psychedelic murals, and drove it around San Francisco like a queen bee. But friends noticed the cracks. Under the feathers and the velvet, her eyes were often glazed and sad. She was shooting thousands of dollars of heroin into her veins, trying to recreate the feeling of the Monterey ovation in the quiet of her bedroom. She was surrounded by sycophants, dealers, and lovers who passed through her life like ghosts, but true intimacy remained elusive. She was the most famous woman in rock, yet she couldn't find anyone to hold her hand when the lights went out. If Monterey was her coronation, Woodstock was nearly her abdication. By August 1969, Janis was a bona fide superstar, commanding huge fees and traveling with a massive entourage. But beneath the velvet and the swagger, the cracks were widening. She arrived at the festival grounds by helicopter, looking down at the sea of 500,000 people in the mud. The sheer scale of it terrified her. She was slated to perform on Saturday night, but the chaotic schedule pushed her set deeper and deeper into the darkness. To calm her nerves, and to kill the boredom, she started drinking tequila and shooting heroin in the backstage tent. By the time she finally stumbled onto the stage at 2 a.m., she was glassy-eyed and physically unsteady. The performance was raw, yes, but it was also sloppy. Her voice cracked in ways that weren't stylistic choices, they were the sounds of vocal cords being shredded. She clung to the microphone stand for balance. While the audience roared, starved for any entertainment after hours of waiting, Janis knew the truth. She came off stage weeping, convinced she had failed. She had given them the Pearl caricature, not the artist. It is telling that when the Woodstock documentary was being edited, Janis initially refused to be in it, ashamed of her condition. It remains a haunting snapshot of a woman being consumed by her own legend. Post-Woodstock, the pressure to evolve intensified. Her new band, the Cosmic Blues Band, was a bold experiment, a wall of brass and R&B rhythms meant to emulate her idols like Otis Redding. But the rock press was unkind. They missed the psychedelic, guitar-driven chaos of Big Brother. They called the new sound Las Vegas Soul and accused Janis of over-singing, of becoming a parody of herself. She screams too much, one critic wrote, a line that cut her to the bone. The tour for the I Got Dem Ol' Cosmic Blues Again Mama album was a grueling test of endurance. Europe loved her, but the isolation of the road was becoming lethal. She was the only woman in a boys' club, traveling on buses and planes, expected to be one of the guys. She played poker, drank the crew under the table, and laughed the loudest, but the moment the hotel room door closed, the silence was deafening. She began to refer to heroin as heroin father and alcohol as alcohol mother. They were the only parents that didn't judge her, didn't ask for autographs, and didn't demand she sing "Piece of My Heart" one more time. In early 1970, sensing that she was dancing on the edge of a cliff, Janis made a desperate attempt to clean up. She flew to Rio de Janeiro for Carnival, leaving the heroine and the hangers-on back in the States. For a few brief, sun-drenched weeks, she was just Janis. She stopped wearing the feathers and the boas. She wore simple clothes, walked on the beach, and let the sun bleach her hair. She looked younger, healthier. The puffiness left her face. It was there she met David Niehaus, an American tourist traveling the world. He was handsome, grounded, and crucially, he wasn't a fan. He treated her like a woman, not a rock star. They fell in love with the intensity of a summer storm. For the first time, Janis saw a potential exit strategy. She talked about quitting music, about traveling to Africa with David, about living a life where she didn't have to bleed on stage every night. She wrote letters home that were bursting with hope. She was clean. She was happy. She was free. But gravity is a cruel mistress. When Janis returned to San Francisco, the real world was waiting with its claws out. The music industry machinery demanded a new album. Her old dealer was one of the first people to knock on her door. The identity of Janis Joplin, rock star, was a heavy coat that was impossible to take off. David Niehaus arrived in California to be with her, but he found the atmosphere of her home, filled with junkies, sycophants, and chaos, unbearable. He tried to save her, but the pull of the needle was too strong. When Janis relapsed, Niehaus left. He went to travel the world, as he had planned, leaving Janis behind. His departure shattered the fragile hope she had built in Rio. She felt abandoned once again, confirming her deepest, darkest fear, that she was unlovable. She channeled this heartbreak into the only thing she had left, the music. She fired the Cosmic Blues Band and formed a new group, the Full Tilt Boogie Band. This final band was perfect. Stripped down, tighter, rockier, but with a boogie stride that matched her Texas roots. Ken Pearson on organ and John Till on guitar understood her phrasing instinctively. In the summer of 1970, they entered Sunset Sound Recorders in Los Angeles to record what would become her masterpiece, Pearl. The sessions were different this time. Janis was focused. She was producing the album herself in spirit, if not in title. She was meticulous about the arrangements. She recorded Me and Bobby McGee, transforming Chris Christopherson's country ballad into a road anthem of freedom and loss. She laid down the vocals for Cry Baby, a performance so intense that the engineer had to stop the tape because he was shaking. She was creating the best work of her life. She was engaged to be married to a new man, Seth Morgan, a chaotic figure in his own right, and outwardly, she seemed to be managing. But the hole inside was still there, and the velvet blanket of heroin was the only thing that kept the demons at bay in the lonely hours of the night. She was walking a tightrope over an abyss, singing at the top of her lungs, hoping she wouldn't look down. October 1970 in Los Angeles was thick with smog and a strange, heavy tension. The counterculture was reeling from the death of Jimi Hendrix in London just 2 weeks prior. Janis took the news hard. "I wonder if I'll get as much press as him," she joked darkly to her friends, a defense mechanism to hide the terror that she was next in line. She was staying at the Landmark Motor Hotel, a nondescript, beige building on Franklin Avenue that was favored by musicians for its privacy and its tolerance of excess. It wasn't the Ritz, it was a place where you could disappear. Janis was in room 105. On Saturday, October 3rd, the vibe in Sunset Sound Studios was electric. The band laid down the instrumental track for a new song, Buried Alive in the Blues. It was a driving, funky number, perfect for Janis's gritty vocals. She was in high spirits, dancing around the control room, telling the band, "We're gonna do the vocals tomorrow, man, it's gonna be heavy." She was excited. She was also waiting. Her fiancé, Seth Morgan, had promised to fly down from San Francisco to visit her, but he hadn't shown up. He hadn't called. The old demon, rejection, was whispering in her ear again. After the session, she went out for drinks with band member Ken Pearson at Barney's Beanery. They laughed, they drank vodka and orange juice, but beneath the surface, the loneliness was waiting to pounce the moment she was alone. She returned to room 105 shortly after midnight. The silence of a hotel room is a specific kind of loud. It amplifies your thoughts. To quiet them, Janis reached for her kit. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the batch of heroin she had purchased earlier that day was not the usual street sludge. It was China White, a grade of purity that was nearly 50%, compared to the standard 3 to 5%. It was a loaded gun. Her dealer hadn't cut it properly. Several other customers of the same dealer would overdose that weekend in Los Angeles. It wasn't a suicide attempt, it was a tragic error in chemistry. After the injection, she didn't collapse immediately. She walked to the lobby to buy a pack of cigarettes. She chatted with the night clerk, George. She seemed normal, just a tired musician winding down. She returned to her room, closed the door, and began to undress. She was holding the change from the cigarettes, $4.50, in her left hand. And then, the lights went out. She collapsed beside the bed, striking her face on the bedside table. The force of the fall wedged her body against the door. There were no last words, no dramatic goodbyes. Just a sudden, absolute stop. The woman who had screamed loud enough to shake the foundations of the patriarchal world died in total silence, clutching $4.50. The next day, Sunday, October 4th, the sun rose over Hollywood, but Janis didn't show up at the studio. Producer Paul Rothschild was annoyed. Janis was never late. He called the landmark. No answer. By late afternoon, road manager John Cook drove to the hotel. He saw her psychedelic Porsche still parked in the lot. A knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He knocked on door 105. Silence. He got the key from the manager. The door was blocked from the inside. He pushed it open, and the world changed forever. The autopsy confirmed an accidental overdose. The news swept through the music world like a cold wind. First Jimmy, now Janis. The two pillars of the American counterculture had crumbled within 3 weeks of each other. They were both 27. The coincidence was so horrifying that it birthed the dark mythology of the 27 Club. But beyond the myth, there was the tragedy of the art. The album Pearl was nearly finished, but the vocals for Buried Alive in the Blues were never recorded. When the album was released posthumously in 1971, the track was included as an instrumental. It is a haunting listen, a funky, lively track with a gaping hole in the middle where Janis should have been. It serves as a permanent memorial to her absence. 3 months after her death, Pearl hit #1 on the Billboard charts. It was her masterpiece, polished, powerful, and heartbreakingly real. The opening track, Mercedes-Benz, was an a cappella recording she had made on a whim just days before she died. Hearing her voice, stripped of all instruments, laughing at the end, felt like a ghost whispering in the listener's ear. "That's it," she chuckles on the tape. It was the final punctuation mark of her life. Janis had one last surprise. In her will, she had set aside $2,500 for a wake party to be thrown in the event of her death. The invitations read, "Drinks are on Pearl." It was held at the Lion's Share in San Anselmo. The Grateful Dead played, the booze flowed, and her friends told stories, laughed, and cried. She wanted to go out not as a tragedy, but as a host, buying the house one last round. Her remains were cremated. Unlike Jimmy, who has a grave that became a pilgrimage site, Janis wanted no stone, no marker, no place for people to mourn a corpse. Her ashes were scattered from a plane into the Pacific Ocean along Stinson Beach. She became part of the wind, part of the salt spray, part of the elements. Janis Joplin was not a victim. She was a pioneer who kicked down the doors of a male-dominated industry with her boots and her blues. She showed the world that a woman could be ugly, beautiful, messy, loud, and powerful all at the same time. She wore her heart on the outside, a target for everyone to see, and she never flinched. If you listen to "Cry Baby" tonight, turn it up until the speakers rattle. Listen to that scream at the end. That isn't just a note, it is the sound of a human soul breaking the sound barrier. She came, she screamed, and she left us with the echo. The "Little Girl Blue" finally found a place where no one could hurt her. She is free.